And high-ranking U.S., European, and Ukrainian officials met in France yesterday to attempt to bring an end to the Russia-Ukraine war. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Presidential Envoy Steve Witkoff were in attendance. Let's discuss this development with two security analysts. Please welcome our panelists, Kervin Aucoin and Rebecca Grant. Kervin is the former lead intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance coordinator for the U.S. Army and the host of This Week Explained podcast. Rebecca is the vice president of the Lexington Institute and a national security analyst. Great to have you both with us. Kervin, let's start with you. This is the first known time that these three major players have met for such talks. Can that bring a new dynamic to lead to peace?
Well, first of all, thank you, Rebecca. Nice to meet you as well. And I will say that it could bring a new dynamic, but we've got one player in here who I would say is not playing along, and that's the Russian Federation, and that's Vladimir Putin. Look, Putin has no desire to stop this war. He has got a wartime economy right now, and even bringing in the entire EU, along with the U.S. presidential envoy, is doing nothing to stop that. Marco Rubio said just this morning that his Russian counterpart told him they're not going to have a ceasefire. They have peace there anytime soon. And Marco Rubio said that the U.S. envoy is getting frustrated right now.
Well, certainly. And yes, I'd like to bring Rebecca in on this. Now, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, says that they want practical solutions to end the fighting. Can you give us a picture of what that might look like, given that we just saw how he seems to be at his wit's end here with these negotiations and how they can't drag on for much longer?
Right. Well, no question, Putin has a taste for war. But I think when Secretary Rubio talks about practical solutions, we know that in Paris they discussed what peacekeeping forces might look like. They've also discussed the thing that's most important to the European allies, and that is Ukraine's future security position going forward. Remember, that's still an 800-mile front. The European allies really are still very afraid of what Putin might do. So they want to see what that situation will look like. And then underneath and around all this is the question of continued military assistance and then the economic support and reconstruction of Ukraine whenever that begins. So I think they went through a lot of details. Of course, we're going to see Russian propaganda, but here's Rubio trying to really hold firm and make some progress.
Understood, Rebecca. And building on what you're saying, there's an analyst at the Center for European Policy Analysis in Washington, and that's Polyakova. She says that this is really, really important because the U.S. process has stalled, and now it's important to bring the Europeans in because they actually do have skin in the game. Kervin, open to comment on that, or you can mention how Ukraine's presidential advisor said Ukrainian officials discussed with their European counterparts the next steps in what's called a multinational military contingent. What would that look like?
Yeah, I think first off that the European Union and the United States need to, in fact, put more pressure on the Russian Federation and Russian President Vladimir Putin to actually come to the negotiating table in good faith. Look, there does need, as Rebecca was saying, there does need to be a security contingent in Ukraine for Ukrainian security. We saw this happen in the 90s when nuclear weapons were taken out of Ukraine. That was done by the Russian Federation because they knew what they wanted to do in the future was remove security guarantees for Ukraine so that they could make these moves and return Ukraine back to the Russian Federation. So what would a security contingent look like? Well, it's going to be the UK, Germany, the biggest militaries you have in the EU. But as they've said, it has got to be backed by the United States, and it will have to have some U.S. military support within that contingency.
Understood, Kervin. And also, Rebecca, building on top of that, France and Britain could potentially lead a coalition of 30 nations that would police any possible peace agreement made with Russia. Is that a viable plan?
Yes, and remember, Zelensky has said that he will accept air defenses and use of NATO air power as one of the keys to the security guarantees. This is actually a really big and important change So Ukraine will have, more U.S. Patriot missiles, more, and the rest of the air defense system. And then our European partners, they want air defenses too, and of course more tanks, from Poland right on down the line to continue to contain Russia after this Ukraine war is over. So we're getting into some very specific details, and there is actually real progress, I think, with Zelensky. The key is getting Russia to agree, and I think that's going to rely on Ambassador Witkoff's behind-the-scenes, economic-oriented negotiations with Russia.
Okay, and Kervin, I'd like to bring you in. Can you expand on what Rebecca was saying there, given that there's new leadership in the White House now, whether or not President Trump and his delegation will be able to make any progress on Russia's part?
Well, honestly, looking through it and going over the last few months, it doesn't seem like there is going to be any progress. What they have tried to do is they have tried to capitulate some things to Putin. President Donald Trump has been very forceful on Zelensky. He has said behind the scenes that he's very frustrated with Putin, but he still has not come out and called out President Putin for starting this war. He actually, earlier this week, called out Zelensky and basically said that Zelensky shouldn't have started this war. You can't start a war with a country 10 times your size. I think that commentary out in the public is doing a disservice to his team that's out in Europe right now trying to get a peace deal. And so Putin has all the cards here, and he has no desire to sign anything that would capitulate any land or security guarantees to Ukraine.
So, Kervin, just 2 days ago, we saw a massive drone attack on the Ukrainian city of Dnipro. Is this ramp-up pressure being used to gain leverage in any negotiation situation?
Yeah, absolutely. It's also, what we've seen with Russia continuing to make an offensive push to try to take more land from Ukraine so that they hold more leverage in these negotiations. And that's why we're seeing Ukraine go on counteroffensives into Russian territory, because they want to ramp this up so that they have something to bring to the table. Look, Ukraine doesn't want to hold that land in Russia. It's not economically feasible for them, but they can use it as a negotiating tactic in any of these negotiations. So yeah, that's happening. Putin just said today that the ceasefire is over on infrastructure, that limited ceasefire, and he's going to start ramping up attacks on the infrastructure so that he can get Ukraine to just give up.
Okay, Rebecca, can you paint a big picture for us here? This war has been raging for 3 years now, over 3 years, and it's almost the 100-day mark in President Trump's presidency of his second term. Is there anything different now than, say, in prior negotiations?
Yes, the big picture is China. Putin could never have done this attack 3 years ago without China's support, without China's huge purchases of Russian energy. We've seen a couple Chinese nationals fighting. We know that there is Chinese technical assistance in various forms going into Russia, and of course, Iran helping as well. That's the big picture. I think what's different in the last 100 days is there has been slow progress with Zelensky, with the European allies, and a little bit of progress. Trump is trying to use restoration of U.S.-Russia bilateral relations to create economic incentives and carrots to get Putin to agree to something in Ukraine. It's going to take time. Maybe it'll work. Maybe not. We'll see.
Well, thank you both for weighing in on this very important topic this morning. Kervin Aucoin and Rebecca Grant.
Thank you.
Thank you.